At dawn on August 9, 1942, Marines from the 1st Marine Division stood on the beaches of Guadalcanal and watched the last American warships fade beyond the horizon. The Navy was departing. Every ship, every destroyer, every transport. They pulled away at full speed, leaving 11,000 Marines on an island the Japanese intended to reclaim. The Marines watched the vessels shrink into the distance. They watched the smoke trails drift into the morning air. They watched their lifeline to the rest of the war vanish entirely. The Navy had fought a battle the night before in the waters off Savo Island, the worst surface combat defeat in U.S. naval history. 4 heavy cruisers lost in half an hour. Hamas Canberra, USS Astoria, USS Quincy, USS Vincennes, 1 Australian, 3 American. More than 1,000 sailors killed in the dark sea. Admiral Richmond Kelly Turner ordered all transports and naval escorts to retreat immediately. Too hazardous to remain. Japanese bombers from Rabaul could appear at any moment. Additional enemy ships might return that night. The risk was overwhelming. The Marines would have to cope alone. Marines glanced at the scattered supplies behind them: food, ammunition, medical gear, construction materials. The transports had been unloading for 2 days when the withdrawal order arrived. Less than half the planned cargo reached shore. 11,000 Marines, 17 days of rations including captured Japanese rice. Only 4 days of ammunition, no heavy machinery, no reserve stock, no means of resupply. Henderson Field was barely functional. The airstrip the Japanese had started building, seized by Marines on August 7, had to be completed, defended, and somehow kept operational with whatever remained. Henderson Field was the entire point of being on Guadalcanal: control the airfield, control the Solomons, protect the supply route to Australia. Lose it, lose the Pacific Campaign. The tactical outlook was simple: hold or perish. Among the Marines watching the Navy depart were several young men from H Company, 2nd Battalion, 1st Marine Regiment, Private First Class Sidney Phillips, only 17 when he enlisted the day after Pearl Harbor. His friend Doe Brown, who joined the same day, Jim Young from the mortar platoon, Roy Gerlich and Art Pendleton, their squadmates, all part of the 81mm mortar section, all teenagers, all about to experience 4 months of combat that would test everything they believed about themselves and war. Phillips wouldn't turn 18 until September 2nd. During the fighting, the Navy's departure meant these Marines and thousands like them would confront the Japanese with whatever ammunition remained, and whatever food they could seize or scrounge. Major General Alexander Archer Vandegrift, commanding the 1st Marine Division, was 55 years old, born in Charlottesville, Virginia. He had served in Nicaragua, Haiti, and China. He knew jungle warfare, guerrilla tactics, counterinsurgency, and the fate of isolated units cut off from support. On the morning of August 9th, Vandegrift received Turner's message: all naval forces withdrawing, Marines left on their own. He looked to his operations officer, Colonel Gerald Thomas, a former enlisted Marine who had earned a Silver Star and Battlefield Commission at Below Wood, the division's planner, energetic and brilliant. Neither man spoke as the meeting settled in. Then Vandegrift issued his orders: hold the perimeter, finish the airfield, make do with what's left. Thomas moved to the maps, calculating defensive lines. The Lunga perimeter was roughly 5 miles wide and 2 miles deep. Marines had to guard Henderson Field in the center, beaches to the north, jungle approaches from the south and east. Conditions on Guadalcanal became brutal almost immediately. Japanese bombers from Rabaul struck Henderson Field on August 10th. Marines working on the airstrip had no fighter protection. The Navy carriers were gone. Anti-aircraft guns weren't fully set up. Bombs cratered the field. Men were killed filling holes and repairing the runway. The labor never ceased. Disease spread quickly. Malaria, dysentery, fungal infections, jungle rot. Medical supplies were critically short. Marines distrusted the small yellow atabrine tablets meant to prevent malaria, believing they caused sterility, and often spit them out when corpsmen weren't watching. Malaria cases exploded. The stench of Guadalcanal stayed with every marine, rotting vegetation, soaked earth, human waste, aviation fuel, and death. At night the jungle pressed against the perimeter. Creatures moved in the darkness, sometimes Japanese scouts, sometimes wild pigs, sometimes crocodiles in the rivers. Ammunition was precious. Marines learned not to fire at every noise. They ate captured Japanese rice mixed with leftover American rations, often infested with insects. 2 small meals a day. Men lost weight rapidly. Uniforms mildewed. Boots disintegrated. Equipment rusted. Phillips later recalled their green cotton uniforms' camouflage patterns hadn't yet been issued. He carried a Springfield M1903 rifle, serial number 345293, issued at Paris Island. American codebreakers at Station Hypo had intercepted messages. A Japanese regiment was loading onto destroyers and fast transports, bound for a landing east of the marine perimeter. Their goal: recapture Henderson Field and eject the Americans from Guadalcanal. Japanese commanders believed only 2,000 Marines were on the island. Wrong by 5-fold, but confident regardless. On August 18th, Vandegrift gathered his battalion commanders, explaining the situation. The Japanese were coming soon, likely from the east. No fallback positions, no evacuation, no reinforcements. Hold the airfield. Hold the perimeter. When one commander asked what would happen if the line collapsed, Vandegrift answered, "Then we all die here." On the night of August 20th, a Solomon Islander named Martin Clemens, a coastwatcher and former district officer, reached Vandegrift with intelligence. Japanese forces had landed at Taivu Point, 20 miles east, about 900 to 1,000 men, preparing to march west. They would attack at night. Colonel Clifton Cates, commanding the 1st Marine Regiment, positioned his battalion along the river the Marines called Alligator Creek, actually the Ilu River, mislabeled on U.S. maps. The sandbar at its mouth, 7-15 meters wide, was the only crossing point. Cates placed Browning M1917 machine guns on the west bank. Riflemen dug in behind them, artillery pre-registered on the far shore. The Marines waited. At T-130 am on August 21st, gunfire shattered the eastern perimeter. Japanese shouting, American commands, machine gun hammering, rifle cracks, grenade blasts. Sidney Phillips, 400 yards back with the mortar platoon, could hear everything but see nothing in the darkness. The noise continued for hours. Marines advanced and found devastation. Hundreds of Japanese dead on the sandbar, in the water, piled along the bank. Machine gun fire, canister shot, grenades at close range. Later that morning, Lieutenant Colonel Edwin Pollock visited the mortar positions. Tough, aggressive. He asked who the gunner was. Phillips raised his hand. Pollock told him, "Use me as the range stake," ran forward, and had Phillips sight the mortar on him. They adjusted range and destroyed a Japanese manned amphibious tractor that had been firing from across the river. Around a M3 Stuart tanks from the 1st Tank Battalion arrived, crossed the sandbar, and swept through the coconut grove. Meanwhile, Marines circling from the south drove the surviving Japanese into the sea, where they were shot as they tried to escape. By noon, the fight was finished. Of the 917 men in the Achiki detachment's first wave, fewer than 30 survived. The rest died at Alligator Creek or on the sandbar trying to reach American positions. Colonel Kona Achiki, the Japanese commander, died in the battle. Some accounts say he was killed advancing toward American lines. Others say he committed ritual suicide after burning his regimental flag to prevent its capture. Either way, the Achuca Regiment ceased to exist as a fighting force. Phillips and other Marines walked through the battlefield afterward, bodies everywhere. The ground torn up by machine gun fire, artillery, tank tracks, blood, FLIs, the smell. Phillips had never seen anything like it. Nobody had. But it changed something fundamental. For months, Japanese forces had been winning everywhere. Malaya, Singapore, the Philippines, the Dutch East Indies, Burma. The Japanese army seemed invincible. Superior fighting spirit, superior jungle tactics, superior night fighting. American propaganda acknowledged it. Training manuals emphasized it. The Japanese were better soldiers. That was the assumption drilled into every Marine during training. Alligator Creek proved it wrong. 11,000 Marines abandoned by the Navy, low on supplies and ammunition, dug into defensive positions, and destroyed a crack Japanese regiment in a few hours. The Japanese had attacked with absolute confidence and been slaughtered. Word of the victory spread through the perimeter. Men who had been watching the horizon, expecting Japanese reinforcements and their own deaths, started believing they might survive. Maybe they could hold Henderson Field. Maybe planes would come. Maybe the Navy would return. Maybe. The problem was, the Japanese had the same realization. If 900 men could not take Henderson Field, send more. Send thousands more. Major General Kiyotake Kawaguchi commanded the 35th Infantry Brigade. He was a veteran officer with extensive combat experience in China and the Dutch East Indies. He had studied American tactics at staff colleges. He knew Americans relied on firepower and defensive positions. He planned an attack that would avoid American strengths and exploit weaknesses. 3 coordinated assaults from different directions. One from the east along the coast. One from the south through the jungle. One from the west across the Matanaka River. The main effort would come from the south, through terrain the Americans thought was impenetrable. Dense jungle, steep ravines, no trails. Kawaguchi's men would march through that jungle carrying their weapons and equipment. Approach Henderson Field from the rear and attack at night, when American firepower was less effective. The plan was tactically sound. It almost worked. Lieutenant Colonel Merritt Edson commanded the 1st Raider Battalion. Edson was 45 years old, born April 25, 1897. They called him Red Mike because of his red hair. He had fought Sandino's guerrillas in Nicaragua in the 1920s and 1930s. He knew guerrilla warfare intimately. He knew night fighting. Heck knew ambush tactics and jungle warfare better than most American officers. He had earned 2 Navy Crosses in Nicaragua for actions under fire. On September 9th, Edson stood on a ridge south of Henderson Field, studying the terrain with field glasses. Colonel Gerald Thomas, Vandergrift's operations officer, stood with him. Edson pointed to the ridge. If the Japanese attack from the south, they will come through here. This ridge is the only high ground between the jungle and the airfield. If they take this ridge, they can bring artillery forward and destroy Henderson Field from 200 yards away. We lose the ridge. We lose the airfield. We lose the airfield. We lose Guadalcanal. We lose Guadalcanal. We lose the Salomonas lands. The whole campaign collapses. Thomas asked what Edson needed. Edson said, "Give me my Raiders and the 1st Parachute Battalion, about 840 men total. Let me defend this ridge. I guarantee the Japanese will not get past us." Thomas took the request to Vandergrift. Vandergrift trusted Edson's instincts completely. He approved immediately. On September 11th, Edson's Raiders and the 1st Parachute Battalion moved onto the ridge. The Raiders had already fought on Tulagi. They were tough, experienced, well-led. The parachutists were elite troops, volunteers who had gone through extra training. Together, they were the best infantry on Guadalcanal. They dug foxholes along the ridge. They positioned machine guns with interlocking fields of fire. They registered artillery targets with the 11th Marines. Forward observers plotted coordinates for every approach. They cleared fields of fire, cutting down vegetation that might provide cover for attackers. They strung what little barbed wire they had. They prepared defensive positions in depth, primary positions with fallback lines. They cached ammunition and grenades at key points. Then they waited. On the night of September 12th, the battle started. Artillery fire first. Japanese mortar sand howitzers dropping shells on the ridge. The bombardment was brief, but intense. Then rifle fire from the jungle below. Then screaming Japanese soldiers charging up the ridge in waves, yelling battle cries. Edson's Marines firing from foxholes, Springfields and Kneefields, and machine guns hammering, cutting the attackers down. The Japanese kept coming. When one wave died, another formed and charged. Marines fell back to secondary positions as ordered, firing as they moved, then held the new line. The Japanese came again. Artillery fire from the 11th Marines was critical. Forward observers called in coordinates. American shells landed close, substantially close, to Marine positions 20 yards in front of the foxholes. The concussion was terrifying, but the shells were killing Japanese soldiers massed for attacks. Some positions had hand-to-hand fighting. Marines and Japanese soldiers bayoneting each other in complete darkness. Grenades thrown back and forth. The sound was constant. Rifle fire, machine gun fire, explosions, screaming in English and Japanese. Edson moved among his positions throughout the night. He stood on top of a grenade box giving orders while bullets snapped past his head. He refused to get down. His Marines saw him standing there under fire and held their positions. If the colonel could stand in the open, they could fight from their foxholes. The Japanese attacks continued through the night. At dawn on September 13th, there was a brief lull. Wounded were evacuated. Ammunition was redistributed. The dead were left where they fell. There was no time for burial. That night, the Japanese came again. Heavier attacks, better coordinated. They reached within 50 yards of Edson's command post. Marines formed a final defensive line. This was it. If Thistland broke, the Japanese would be through. Henderson Field would be in artillery range. The airfield would be destroyed. Marines loaded weapons and waited. The Japanese charged. Marines fired everything they had. Rifles, machine guns, grenades, artillery. Thenuous was beyond description. Individual shots merged into continuous roar. Japanese soldiers died in piles in front of Marine positions. But more kept coming. Some broke through. Marines fit them hand-to-hand in foxholes. Bayonets, knives, entrenching tools, rifle butts, fists, anything. In one position, a Marine ran out of ammunition and beat a Japanese soldier to death with his helmet. The fighting was primeval, savage, desperate, but feline hell. At dawn on September 14th, the Japanese attack stopped. Kawaguchi had lost over 600 confirmed, killed, with hundreds more wounded, dying in the jungle. His brigade was shattered. The survivors retreated west to regroup. Edson's forces had lost 57 killed, 40 from the Raider Battalion, 17 from the Parachute Battalion, 232 wounded. They held the ridge. Henderson Field was safe. Marines started calling it Bloody Ridge. Others called it Edson's Ridge. Either name worked. The smell was worse than anything. At Alligator Creek, bodies had been lying in tropical heat for 2 days. FLIs were thick. The ridge was torn apart. Every tree shredded by bullets. The ground covered in shell craters, spent cartridges, blood, piece of equipment, unexploded grenades. Marines sat in their foxholes, too exhausted to move. Some cried. Some laughed, from relief, or hysteria, or shock. Most stared at nothing. What Marines did not know was that their success on Guadalcanal had changed Japanese strategy across the entire Pacific. Lieutenant General Harukichi Hyakutake commanded the Japanese 17th Army, headquartered at Rabaul. He had been planning a major offensive in New Guinea to capture Port Moresby and threaten Australia directly. That offensive required troops, supplies, air support, naval support. Everything was in place. Japanese forces were within 30 miles of Port Moresby. Then Kawaguchi's defeat at Bloody Ridge arrived. In reports to Rabaul, Hyakutake read the casualty figures. He read the tactical analysis. He understood what it meant. The Americans on Guadalcanal were not collapsing. They were getting stronger. Henderson Field was operational. American planes were flying from the airfield every day, attacking Japanese ships, bombing Japanese positions on Guadalcanal, intercepting Japanese aircraft. As long as Henderson Field existed, Japanese could not control the Solomons. As long as Japanese did not control the Solomons, they could not secure their southern flank. As long as their southern flank was insecure, they could not advance further anywhere. Imperial General Headquarters agreed with Yakutak's assessment. Suspend the New Guinea offensive, send everything to Guadalcanal, retake Henderson Field, destroy the American Marines. That became the absolute priority. Japanese troops within 30 miles of Port Moresby received orders to withdraw on September 15. They would never get that close again. The decision to prioritize Guadalcanal over New Guinea fundamentally altered the Pacific War's strategic direction. The Japanese Navy responded by increasing attacks on Henderson Field. Warships approached at night and shelled the airfield with 8 guns from cruisers and 14 guns from battleships. The bombardments destroyed planes, cratered runways, set fuel dumps on fire, killed Marines in their sleep. The worst bombardment came on the night of October 14. 2 Japanese battleships, Congo and Haruna, both Congo-class battleships with 14 main batteries steamed into position north of Guadalcanal. They opened fire at Henderson Field from 12,000 yards at approximately 1:30 in the morning. They fired for 83 minutes, 973 14 shells. Each shell weighed 1,500 lb. The Marines had no name for it except the bombardment, always capitalized, always spoken with dread. The sound was beyond description, not like artillery, which Marines knew. This was like the earth itself being torn apart. The ground shook with each impact. Dirt and debris rained from the sky. Trees burst into flame. The blast waves from shells landing hundreds of yards away knocked men down in their foxholes. Marines pressed themselves to the bottoms of their holes and prayed. Some screamed but could not be heard over the impacts. Some lost their minds temporarily curled into balls, unable to move. When dawn came, Henderson Field was a moonscape. Craters everywhere, some 15 feet deep. 48 planes destroyed out of 90 total. Fuel supplies burning, sending black smoke thousands of feet into the air. Ammunition dumps had exploded during the bombardment. The runway was so damaged it looked unusable, cratered and torn. Pierced steel, planking, twisted and scattered. But Marines fixed it. Engineers from the 1st Pioneer Battalion worked through the morning despite exhaustion and fear. They filled craters with coral and dirt. They leveled surfaces. They patched the runway with pierced steel planking salvaged from damaged sections and supply dumps. They worked under threat of Japanese air attack, because the Japanese bombers came every day. By noon, planes could take off if they were careful. By evening, planes could land. Henderson Field was operational again. The Japanese could not believe it. They had thrown the heaviest naval bombardment of the campaign at that airfield. 14 shells from battleships. And still, the Americans kept flying. The air crews operating from Henderson Field became known as the Cactus Air Force, after Cactus, the American code name for Guadalcanal. They flew whatever planes they had. Grumman F for F Wildcats for fighter cover. Douglas SBD Dauntless dive bombers for attacking ships and ground targets. A few Army P-400 era Cobus. Most planes were shot up, patched together with parts scavenged from wrecks, barely airworthy. Fuel was so scarce they siphoned it from destroyed aircraft. Spare parts came from other damaged planes. Mechanics worked around the clock, keeping planes flying. Nothing was wasted. Pilots flew missions until they collapsed from exhaustion, malaria, dysentery, or combat fatigue. Then they slept for a few hours and climbed back in the cockpit and flew again. Every Marine on Guadalcanal understood the equation clearly. Keep Henderson Field running. Stay alive. Lose Henderson Field, die. Simple as that. So they worked through daily air raids and nightly naval bombardments and constant dysentery and malaria and fear that never left. They kept the airfield operational. They kept fighting. On October 23, the Japanese launched their largest ground offensive of the campaign. Hyakutake himself came to Guadalcanal from Rabel to personally command the attack. He brought approximately 20,000 troops, not 30,000 as some estimates claimed, but 2000 was still the largest force yet committed. Artillery, tanks, the 2nd Division, elements of the 38th Division. This was not a regimental attack like Ichuki. This was not a brigade like Kawaguchi. This was a multi-division assault from multiple directions simultaneously. Hyakutake told his officers that Henderson Field would fall within 3 days. Then the Marines would be destroyed. Then Guadalcanal would be Japanese again. The offensive began on October 23 and lasted 4 days and nights. The Japanese attacked from the east. Marines held. The Japanese attacked from the south toward the same ridge Edson had defended. Marines held. The Japanese attacked from the west across the Matanica River. Marines held artillery fire, mortar fire, machine gun fire, rifle fire, hand-to-hand combat in some positions. Marines gave ground in places, then counterattacked and took it back. The Japanese reached within yards off the airfield runway in one western sector. Marine artillery fired at point-blank range, gun crews loading and firing as fast as they could work, sometimes firing over open sights at Japanese infantry in the open. The Japanese attack broke. Survivors retreated back into the jungle. By October 26, Hyakutake's offensive had failed completely. He lost approximately 2,200 to 3,000 men killed, thousands more wounded, many of whom would die in the jungle from lack of medical care. His attacking force was combat ineffective. American casualties were heavy too. Hundreds killed, over 1,000 wounded. But the Marines held. Henderson Field was still American. Sid Phillips and H Company had been in reserve during parts of the October offensive, but saw action at various points. Japanese troops regrouped west of the Matanica River and dug defensive positions. They were no longer trying to retake the island. They were trying to survive long enough to be evacuated. Food supplies were exhausted. They were starving. Disease was rampant. Marines walked through battlefields south and west of the airfield on October 27. The carnage was beyond anything witnessed at Alligator Creek or Bloody Ridge. Bodies, Japanese and American, lay everywhere in various states of decomposition. Equipment scattered across the ground. Helmets, rifles, packs, boots, cantons, ammunition. The smell made men vomit. Marines, hardened by months of combat, stood and vomited from the smell. Nobody talked much. What was there to say? They had won. They were still on Guadalcanal. They were still alive. That was enough. The victory in late October marked the strategic turning point. The Japanese Navy made one final attempt to bombard Henderson Field and land major reinforcements in mid-November. The naval battle of Guadalcanal lasted 3 days from November 12 through 15. 1942. American ships and Japanese ships fought at close range in the waters of Guadalcanal and around Savo Island, where the campaign had begun with Decatur in August. Both sides lost heavily in brutal night surface actions. The Americans lost 2 light cruisers, USS Atlanta and USS Juno, and 7 destroyers sunk. The Japanese lost 2 battleships, He and Kirishima, 1 heavy cruiser, Kinugasa, and 3 destroyers sunk. More importantly for the campaign's outcome, the Japanese lost a transport convoy carrying 7,000 reinforcements and critical supplies. American planes from Henderson Field, the Cactus Air Force that refused to die, sank most of the transports before they could unload. The few transports that did reach shore were forced to unload in daylight under continuous air attack. Most supplies were destroyed before they could be moved inland. The troops who did make it ashore were starving within days because no food had been successfully landed. By late November, the Japanese position on Guadalcanal was hopeless. They could not reinforce. They could not resupply. They could not evacuate during daylight because of American air superiority from Henderson Field. The field they had tried so hard to capture or destroy now controlled the seas and skies around Guadalcanal. The Japanese tried using submarines to bring in supplies. It wasn't nearly enough. They tried using fast destroyers and night runs called the Tokyo Express or Rat Run. American towboats and aircraft from Henderson Field attacked them. Some supplies got through, but nowhere near enough. Japanese soldiers were reduced to eating grass and roots. Thousands died from starvation and disease. On December 9, 1942, Major General Vandergrift and the 1st Marine Division were officially relieved by fresh American forces. The Army's America Division and the 2nd Marine Division took over the lines. Vandergrift's Marines had been on Guadalcanal for 4 months and 2 days. They landed 11,000 strong on August 7th. Approximately 7,000 remained combat effective on December 9th. The rest were casualties or had been evacuated sick with malaria, dysentery, or severe combat fatigue. Sid Phillips and H Company, 2nd Battalion, 1st Marines left Guadalcanal on December 22. They boarded transport ships at Lunga Point and watched the island disappear behind them. Most weighed 30 to 40 pounds less than when they landed. Phillips had lost significant weight from his already lean frame. Most had malaria. Most had dysentery. Most had seen close friends die. Phillips carried Springfield rifle serial number 345-93 off Guadalcanal, the same rifle issued to him at Paris Island. The 1st Marine Regiment sailed to Melbourne, Australia for rest, recovery, and training for the next operation. The Army and Marines were-placed. Vandergrift's division continued the Guadalcanal campaign until February 7, 1943, when the last Japanese forces evacuated under cover of darkness in a brilliantly executed withdrawal operation. American forces found empty positions and abandoned equipment. The next morning, approximately 14,800 Japanese soldiers had died in combat on Guadalcanal. Another 9,000 to 10,000 died from disease and starvation. In the final months, the Japanese successfully evacuated approximately 10,000 survivors, most of them sick, wounded, or severely malnourished. American casualties totaled approximately 500, 92 killed in action, and 4,183 wounded in action. Total casualties, including disease, approached 7,000. The 6-month campaign had been the first sustained ground offensive against Japanese forces in the Pacific War. Lieutenant General Haruki Hyakutake survived the campaign. He returned Torabal and continued to command the 17th Army for the remainder of the war, but he never again attempted a major offensive operation. The defeat at Guadalcanal broke the momentum of Japanese expansion permanently. Before Guadalcanal, Japan was advancing on all fronts. After Guadalcanal, Japan was in strategic retreat across the Pacific. Major General Kayate Kawaguchi, who led the 35th Brigade attack at Bloody Ridge, was relieved of command in late October 1942, after his defeat became clear. He spent the rest of the war in administrative staff positions. He survived and returned to Japan after surrender, but his military reputation was destroyed. He was later convicted for crimes committed in the Philippines during earlier operations and served prison time. Colonel Merritt Edson, who defended the ridge that bears his name, received the Medal of Honor. The citation praised his outstanding and heroic conduct, his inspiring leadership, his personal courage against overwhelming odds. President Roosevelt presented the award on May 21 Street, 1943, in a ceremony at the White House. Edson continued to command the 1st Raider Battalion through the remainder of the Guadalcanal campaign. He later commanded other Marine units in subsequent Pacific operations. He was promoted through the ranks and read emeritus a Major General on August 1 Street, 1947. He struggled with post-traumatic stress in his final years. He died by suicide using carbon monoxide on August 14, 1955, at age 58. He was buried in Arlington National Cemetery with full military honors. Major General Alexander Archer Vandergrift received the Medal of Honor for his command of the 1st Marine Division on Guadalcanal. President Franklin Roosevelt presented the award on February 5, 1943. Felicitation noted Vandergrift's tenacity, courage, and resourcefulness against a strong, determined, and experienced enemy. It praised his ability to command eventually, including sea, land, and air forces from Army, Navy, and Marine Corps in a joint operation. He was promoted to Lieutenant General and commanded the 1st Marine Amphibious Corps at Bougainville in November 1943. On January 1 Street, 1944, Vandergrift became the 18th Commandant of the Marine Corps. On March 21 Street, 1945, He was elevated to 4-star general, the first Marine Corps officer to hold that rank while on active duty. He served as commandant until January 1, 1948, steering the Marine Corps through the conclusion of World War II, demobilization, and the challenging post-war period when the Marine Corps fought for its institutional survival. He retired on April 1, 1949, and passed away on May 8, 1973. At age 86, he was interred at Arlington National Cemetery. Colonel Clifton Cates, who led the 1st Marines and whose forces halted the Achiki Regiment at Alligator Creek, later commanded the 4th Marine Division at Tinian in 1944. Tinian is considered by many military historians as the model amphibious operation of World War II nearly flawlessly executed. Cates subsequently served as the 19th Commandant of the Marine Corps from January 1948 to January 1952, retiring as a 4-star general. Colonel Gerald Thomas, the operations officer who masterminded Guadalcanal's defensive success and served as Vandegrift's closest tactical advisor, accompanied him to Washington after Guadalcanal. He became Director of Plans and Policies at Marine Corps headquarters, effectively acting as Chief of Staff. Thomas later commanded the 1st Marine Division in Korea during some of the most intense fighting of that conflict. He retired as a 4-star general. Lieutenant Colonel Merrill Twining, who had been Thomas's deputy operations officer and known for his assertive, outspoken style, also rose through the ranks. These 4 senior officers, Vandegrift, Thomas, Edson, and Twining, became known as the Guadalcanal Mafia for the bonds forged on the island and their subsequent ascent through Marine Corps leadership. All 4 retired as generals. Their professional and personal relationships, built at Guadalcanal, influenced Marine Corps doctrine and leadership for decades. Private First Class Sidney Phillips eventually returned to the United States after completing his service. While stationed at Cape Gloucester on New Britain Island in late 1943, Phillips decided he wanted to become a physician. After his 4-year Marine Corps enlistment ended on December 31, 1945, he returned to Mobile, Alabama. He utilized the GI Bill to attend Spring Hill College and later went to medical school, becoming a family physician, practicing in Mobile for over 40 years. In April 1946, he married Mary Victoria Houston in a ceremony in Mobile. His childhood friend, Eugene Sledge, who had become a Marine and fought in some of the Pacific War's bloodiest battles at Peleliu and Okinawa, served as best man. The friendship between Phillips and Sledge, which began in childhood, endured through war, and lasted their entire lives. Phillips practiced family medicine in Mobile for decades, serving the community where he grew up. In 1997, he began writing a memoir for his family, recounting his experiences as a Guadalcanal Marine. He titled it, "You'll Be Sorry," the phonetic spelling of what Marine drill instructors constantly warned recruits: "You'll be sorry you joined." The memoir was published in 2010 by Valor Studios, providing valuable first-hand accounts of combat at the small unit level, details often missing from official histories, his recollections of specific battles, daily life under fire, and the fear, exhaustion, and determination of young Marines fighting their first campaign became an essential primary source for historians. Phillips was featured in Ken Burns' 7-part PBS documentary series The War in 2007. Providing oral history interviews about the Guadalcanal campaign. He was portrayed by Ashton Holmes in the HBO miniseries The Pacific in 2010, and also served as a historical consultant, helping ensure accuracy in depicting the realities of Marine combat in the Pacific theater. Mary Phillips passed away in April 2000. Sidney Phillips died on September 26, 2015, at age 91, in Mobile, the city where he was born. Enlisted, practiced medicine, and raised his family. He was buried alongside his wife. The decision to withdraw the Navy from Guadalcanal after the Battle of Savo Island remains debated among military historians. Admiral Richmond Kelly Turner argued that remaining would have risked losing additional ships, possibly all of the remaining task force, potentially dooming the entire South Pacific campaign. He judged it better to sacrifice supplies and leave Marines temporarily unsupported than to lose the fleet completely. The Marines, however, perceived it differently. They saw ships sailing away, while they were left behind with 17 days of food and only 4 days of ammunition. Some Marines described it as abandonment. Others called it betrayal. Most simply accepted it as reality and adapted. As Marines always do, they improvised, endured, and survived. Historians continue to debate Turner's strategic choice, but the Navy returned within weeks. Supply runs by destroyers began in late August. The crisis passed. Yet for those Marines on the beach on August 9th, watching the ships vanish, nothing was certain. What is indisputable is what happened after the Navy departed. The Marines held through Japanese assaults, naval bombardments, starvation, and disease. They held when conventional military wisdom predicted they would be overrun within weeks. They held because no other option existed. No fallback position, no evacuation plan. Hold or die. Their decision changed the Pacific War's strategic course. Had the Marines been expelled from Guadalcanal in August, September, or October 1942, the Japanese would have controlled the southern Solomon Islands, established major air and naval bases, threatened Australia directly, and disrupted Allied supply lines. Recapturing these positions later would have cost enormous casualties and years of effort. Instead, the Marines secured Henderson Field. The Cactus Air Force operated from it daily despite impossible conditions. American ships eventually used the field for air cover. The Solomons became an American base rather than a Japanese stronghold. The path to Rabaul, the Philippines, and eventually Japan ran through Guadalcanal. It all began with 11,000 Marines standing on a beach, watching the Navy leave, and choosing to remain and defend the airfield at all costs. A monument to the 1st Marine Division stands on Guadalcanal today near the former Henderson Field, now Honiara International Airport, officially renamed in September 2003. The memorial is a simple black stone engraved with over 1,000 names of Marines who died between August and December 1942. Their names appear in division muster rolls, unit citations, Medal of Honor recommendations, casualty reports, and the historical record of those who stayed when the Navy departed and held until relief arrived. This is how history unfolds in war. Not through flawless plans or overwhelming force, but through young Marines like Sidney Phillips and his squadmates, holding a perimeter with 17 days of rations, 4 days of ammunition, eating wormy rice, succumbing to malaria and dysentery, fighting off nightly Japanese attacks, and refusing to surrender.